Hi. Do you ever feel like your story is boring, or your story doesn't even matter, or it's not as good as anybody else's, or why would anybody ever listen to you? Or maybe you've never seen your story reflected anywhere else. So you think that, like, oh, it must not be important, or people have been giving you the messages that your story is not important. Listen, I want you to tune in to this conversation today. I'm going to bring on Lisa, who is, and she's joining us from LA, which is where I'm moving to on Sunday, and I'm very excited about. And we're going to dive into why your story matters. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Sarah. Great to see you.
Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Very excited to be on this Instagram live.
Yay, me too. I'm so excited for this conversation. I look like I don't have the top of my head. There we go. Let's have a look at my hairline so I don't look like a bald person. Not that there's anything wrong with bald people. So thank you for joining us. Can you introduce yourself? Tell
Hi,
us about who you are and what you do.
I'm Lisa Liang, and I am a lot of things: actor, writer, speaker, and facilitator. And my passion is to give people the tools and the courage to tell their own unique stories. So I specialize on people whose stories are rarely on stage or screen, and who are ready to share them with whomever, either the world at large or a small group of people, but they're writing their memoirs or their solo show or essays or a keynote about themselves.
I love that. What are some of the kind of common trends that you see in people who are, they obviously have this calling to share their story. They feel it's important. Obviously, it's like a very vulnerable and scary thing to do. And there's a lot of like unconscious resistance that can go on in that process. So I'm curious, like, what are the common things that you see in people who are stepping into sharing their story?
Exactly what you said. Yes, it's very vulnerable, and it's a lot of the same fear. They're afraid, no one will care. They're afraid, they'll have a show and people will show up, people won't care, or they'll buy the book, read it, or they'll hurt a family member or friend. I apologize for any noise hearing from the kitchen. Uh, uh, they are worried that they won't finish. They're worried that it's not relatable enough. It's such an unusual life, or they'll think it's boring and not adventurous enough. And are you human? You have emotion. Have you had relationships? Have you had loss? Have you had success? Have you been confused by stuff? Are there patterns that pop up that you've had to deal with and struggle with? Have you just been through and are still going through a worldwide pandemic? Your life has had, at this point, any participant has been through some rough stuff over the last few years. So the underlying emotions for anything in your story will resonate. That's what matters. The details are interesting, but what pulls people in is recognizing and relating to how something felt.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, that's so true. I actually, because I know that that's, like the thing about writing is somehow the more specific it is, the more universal it becomes. But that's why. It's because
Yeah,
it's the emotion. Like we've all experienced, I mean, not all of us, like, but that if we have experienced something on that spectrum, that will be the thing that pulls us in and connects us and allows us to identify with, where we felt that or where we've been through something similar. I love that distinction so much. And I'm so curious to hear, because I know that's a big one. That's been one for me of just this, like, it's that tribal fear of like, oh, if I upset my loved ones, if I upset my family, then I'll be cast out and then I'll die. I'll be miserable. I'll be alone. No one will support me. I won't have a support system. And I know that that's really common, particularly for women stepping out online who are, calling out things that are challenging in our culture or that have, that they want to create change around. And it can be confronting and it can, by its nature, be triggering to other people, particularly people that we're in relationship with. So I'm so curious how you support people through something like that.
it's a great point. Yes, and the main thing there's a few ways to get around that fear or to work with it. Number one, if you make yourself, and this is the number one rule for memoir, so it also applies for autobiographical solo shows or any kind of personal essay, if you make yourself the most flawed person in your story, you are likely to be forgiven by anyone who comes across in not as good a light, because they cannot say, you make yourself out to be this adorable victim. Why the villain? Like, they can't say that because you didn't do that. Because, and that does not mean that you have to tell any stories that have not been processed yet. This does not mean that you're like sharing shame. We are human, therefore we're imperfect. There's no to that rule. So you can pick and choose which story in which you're not you're not thrilled by your behavior at that time. And that actually connects you more to your audience and reader, because they think, oh, she's telling the truth. Now I trust her, and she's being brave. And it's a great way to get to work with your fear about potentially hurting others and being cast out. Also, you always have the choice. Your first draft is your first draft. Write everything you want to write. Every single thing you want to write. Your final draft is something else. Perhaps at that point, name changed. Perhaps at that point, you've taken out, 6 stories of pain over that. There's one. You can talk to them if you're still in relationship with them. What I did with my parents, because they come across both well and not so flattering in light. I sent them the they were in for the show I wrote. And if you want, I can take this out. And I had to work through that, my truth and all that, but I realized the story's still there. I'm still telling, it's all, my parents don't actually have to be in the story. It will make people curious, but that's okay. And they were wonderful and extraordinarily generous and said, okay. And they've just utterly supportive. So I'm one of the lucky, I'm very aware of that, but I didn't know you don't actually know. See what happens, So again, the most flawed person, or at least make yourself perfect, because that's the truth.
I love that. Yeah, that's so important to remember, because yeah, ultimately that's why we do it, right? It's like we're moved by the truth. Like we want to tell the truth, or our truth. And yeah, leading with vulnerability and a cause, as long as you're not just like bashing people for the sake of bashing people, but there's, a good intention behind sharing your work, knowing that, it's going to help other people in the telling of it. I love that a lot, because I think, yeah, vulnerability, that is like the highest form of courage. And like you say, truth is the thing that connects us to others and that builds trust. And there's nothing more powerful than that. And yeah, and I think that definitely resonated. Like I've written a book that's based on a lot of autobiographical stories around my transformation with money. And definitely like the first draft was very cathartic for me. Like it definitely brought up a lot of emotion, things I was still processing through. And in, the second edit, I could see my perspective had changed a little bit on some of the things that I'd written. And I'm about to do my final draft. And yeah, I'm kind of bringing that fine-tooth comb through it, where I just get to check in and ask, like, what is the most powerful way to make this point? And does this do these details about other people need to be in there or not? Or is there a way where I can keep it focused on myself and it will still be just as potent in the message that I want to share without maybe, inflicting potential harm on others? Yeah, I think that's just a judgment call that we all have to make for ourselves individually, right? It's like, what is the point I want to make? What really illustrates this in the most potent and powerful way? And can I do it with grace and humility? And am I willing, to be courageous, to sometimes say the hard things when that's really what's being called for? So it's such a great conversation. I love this. Is there anything else that you really wish more people knew when it comes to you? If you feel that burning desire to tell your story, and you're maybe coming up against some resistance, what would you say to those people?
I would say, one of my lines, your story matters, your feelings about it matter, you must honor them. And it is gold connect with someone else. There's just no way only Homo sapien who has experienced these emotions, and you're not. So somebody needs your, if you're worried about self-indulgence, again, the most flawed person will not be. Number two, someone else needs to hear it or read it. They are feeling in the ways that you have, or in different ways you haven't thought, but your story, for some reason, even if it's utterly different details, it will connect to the heart of them in a way that's going, I promise, help them. They will be grateful to you and you will have done good. So, and it's like you're giving testimony as well as telling a great entertaining story. There is something about the giving testimony to one's own personal experience and the struggles and the internal life that is what, again, reverberates for others. And you think about the times when you read that book or that graphic novel or saw that movie or that TV show or the website, and the person said something and you thought, and I have never seen that before. And that's like a common part of my life, but nobody's ever put it on stage or on a page. And what that felt like, just the validation of that, just the, oh, it's a weird way of like, I exist. This person has told this story that I know in my heart because I've experienced. So do that. Be the conduit for someone else. So it's a good.
I love that. And I think it's so important to remember that, like, you're onto something. If you've never seen this story told, or like there's a gap, you know, in the stories that you're seeing that you feel like is missing a part of who you are, like, be that person to fill that gap, you know, like, it's so important and it's so needed. And it's also like really scary and really vulnerable and really courageous to step out and tell that story. And also, like, I'm super into astrology. So for anyone who has like Aquarius energy, like, know that when you're a revolutionary, you know, we all have it somewhere in our chart, but when you're a revolutionary, when you're telling a new story that hasn't been told, or is a vision of like a new way of living or being that is unfamiliar in our culture, like, you might not get feedback right away. Like, you might get silence on the other end of the phone for a little bit while people are kind of like catching up with your idea or like digesting. You might say something and people might not immediately be like, oh my God, yay, like, I'm so glad you told that story. You might get pushback, you might trigger people. People might be upset with it, with like what you've shared. And that's a really normal part of the process as well. And I think telling ourselves that, yeah, like, all of our fears might come to be. We might get rejection, we might get criticized, we might get hate, we might get threats. And this is why we need to tell the stories, because these stories need to be told, and we need to make space for the stories that need to be told. And obviously sometimes that doesn't always happen, and we can create safe spaces in which to tell our stories where it's very targeted at the people who we know will receive it well. But I think this is such an amazing and important conversation. So I could definitely keep talking about this with you for a very long time, but we will wrap this up. So I would love to know, please tell everybody if they're interested in your work, what have you got going on? Where can they find out more?
Thank you. Just to quickly say, and also you can start small. You can start small. Start with a storytelling venue where you tell a 5-minute story. Start with just a short essay, give to a few friends. So you don't have to throw yourself to the lions right in the beginning.
Right.
Yes, you can always.
Or a social media post.
Right. Exactly. You can find me. The easiest way to find all of my channels, things I do is at ElizabethLiang, LIANG.com, and then /Hapalis, Pruds, PRODS. You just go to ElizabethLiang.com. You'll find it, and you'll find my solo show that's out on film, my workshops that are coming up, my speaking engagements, and I'd love to see you there.
Amazing. Definitely go and check out her amazing work. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, please share this with anyone who you know this will resonate with. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Sarah. Bye. Thanks so much. Thanks all.